like to call the meeting of the Narragansett Regional School District School Committee to order, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I'll just make known that this meeting is being recorded by NRSD, and we provide that recording to Templeton and Phillipston Cable Access TV. We have 2 sets of minutes to approve tonight. When ready, I will take a motion to approve the minutes of September 22nd.
So moved.
I have a first. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a couple of seconds. Do we have any comments? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Unanimous. Next up, we have minutes from September 26th. When someone's ready, I would take a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Unanimous. Approval of bills and payroll. I would take a motion to approve bills and payrolls as presented.
So moved.
Oh, I have a first. Do I have a second?
Second.
And I have a second. Any comments or questions on bills and payroll? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Unanimous. Okay. First up, our student representative. We have James Gould, Jr. class, to give us an update of what's going on.
So, first term is I closed already, even though it just feels like it started last week. I believe grades closed on 30th. All the fall sports are in full swing despite a lot of cancellations and movements to games because there's not been a lot of weather happening. The marching band has been practicing and performing at the parades this season, and as well as all the football games. The people that are going on the Dominican service trip hosted a very successful car wash at Advanced Auto Parts. So we'd like to thank Advanced Auto Parts for letting us do that. Homecoming in general was a huge success. The Warrior Fest before the homecoming game was a huge success. Frank Santos Jr., the hypnotist, came in. That was really fun. I was one of the kids that got hypnotized.
What's the word we're supposed to say to get you to do something?
I don't remember. It's true. It's true. It works. The homecoming dance was really fun. Went off without a hitch. It was really good. And the middle school has had a few dances in the past weeks, and I believe that they have some Halloween dances planned. The Student Advisory Council went to the regional meeting at Hudson High School and discussed issues that students face and discussed them between a few different school districts. Me and Ella were on the same group, and our group discussed student stress and ways we can alleviate and help with student stress, so that's going to be really cool. I'm sure we'll have some type of presentation for you guys following in a few minutes. Upcoming, we have the Class of 2020 Halloween trick-or-treat event. So the Class of 2020, we host a community event for the kids to come trick-or-treat in the parking lot. The Class of 2020 is running a Yankee Candle fundraiser starting tomorrow, so be prepared with your money because we're going to come at you. And all the senior grades for fall sports are scheduled and upcoming.
Great.
Any questions?
Thank you.
What kind of candles?
What kind of candles? All the Yankee candles. They're the fall ones. We got the Christmas one. Guaranteed Christmas delivery, by the way. So I'll put it down to the office.
All right, thank you. Next up, I will turn it over to Dr. Casavant, and we're going to see if he can pronounce the name correctly. This is our side bet.
This is easy, Madam Chair. Actually, if we were to really see who could pronounce the name correctly, because the last name is Tripsano. But I would say that we want to talk to Ms. Calise because apparently she disagrees with how he says his own last name. So we have a running joke with them. But it is my pleasure to introduce to the committee Mr. Joseph Trevisano, who is the middle school vice principal. He hails well, his last, he's worked, I believe in Springfield, Joe, if I'm wrong, please, set me straight, oh, please, yeah, come on up here. And then Southbridge, and so I spoke with Mr. Fernie about him just the other day, and I said, how's he doing? And he literally hit the ground running. And he's been certainly a very visible force in the middle school. I am told that several students has asked if we are brothers. That is quite an insult to Mr. Trevisano, but be that as it may, I offer to you, Mr. Trevisano.
Welcome.
Hi, everybody. Good evening.
Hello?
Thank you for having me here tonight. As Dr. Patrick has said, I am coming from Southbridge. I was an assistant principal and an associate principal both at the middle school. Prior to that, I was a teacher in Springfield. Excited to be here. I think I'm on day 12. But it's been great to this point. I think we have a great team, both in the middle school and across the district. And we're poised to do some great things. If you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Other than that, nice to meet everybody.
Great.
I look forward to working with you.
Great. Well, thank you. Welcome aboard. We're very happy to have you fill out our middle school team, and look forward to some great reports going forward, I'm sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
One of the only downfalls, Madam Chair, is that he's a Jets fan. But we,
Don't forget the Yankees.
I was going to
Well,
say, you and I need to
we've-
have some conversations, but
we've forgotten about the Yankees, Mr. Trevisano.
Rangers or Islanders?
Devils. Yeah, I'm still waiting for my nice bag.
Welcome. Next up, we have Dr. Salabardos with an update on our CPR review. Which I believe, did we get,
You have the,
was there something for
the
us?
quick. It's on the,
It's on the drive.
Yes.
Yep, got it.
So some of the information that I give you tonight is literally going to be hot off the press because it came to us on Monday at 11:34 in the morning. It is a response to the updated corrective action plan and report that we submitted back on September 18th. Now, what I would say about this is that this is a process that, if I said it started back in May of 2017, I'd only be partially right. That is the date that we submitted most of the documentation to start the CPR process, or a coordinated program review. That included several thousand pages of documents, including handbooks, policies, assurance statements relevant to special ed, English language learners, and their civil rights. So those are the three areas that were actually reviewed during the CPR. And what followed after that initial submission was a review of the electronic records, a site visit to review some samples of records that we had in our offices, also surveys that went out to parents through DESE, and the results of those surveys, and then a series of week-long visits with staff, visits to the different schools, interviews with parents and some of the staff and principals and some of the other administrators, a preliminary report that came to us back over the summer, and then the final report which came to us back at the end of August. And our first report, our corrective action plan, again came in September this year on the 18th. So on Monday we received a response to that first round of reporting for our corrective action plan. And you'll see some kind of trends in this as I talk about some of the items here. Basically, there is kind of a backward process here. We get the final report, we submit what we think we should do to actually correct some of these things, and then what we received on Monday was more of a, well, that sounds good, but why don't you do it this way instead? So I'm not quite sure why they don't just do the, why don't you do it this way instead? But like I said, you will see some trends here. In our corrective action plan for September 18th, we talked about some of the ways that we would actually address these things. Some of the things that we've already started, actually one item, as of Monday, they gave us a resolve on because they were actually able to go online and see our actions through the website, access to certain documents there. In the reporting for ourselves, we tried to pick dates that we thought would be most reasonable. And I've got to say that things are really pretty close. That way, Some of the things I had suggested gave us a little bit more time. Some of the things like in ELL, we're a low incidence district. So that means that we have really a small number of students that are English language learners. At this point, we have 5 students that are monitored, receiving no services at all through an English language learner teacher. So we have a full count of 1 student that actually receives pull-out services for English language learners. We have 3 citations. Actually, most of our citations in special ed and in ELL were partially implemented. So always nice to see that. It means that they found a trend of maybe 2 or 3 items in the record reviews or in reviewing our policies that they could say, okay, well, this isn't like rampant, it's not across the entire, it's not the majority of things. So they would give us a partial review on those. I'm actually going to start off with some of the special ed items. Essentially, everything here that we talk about, again, I picked my dates and sent them those dates. This is kind of like talking to Henry Ford back in the 1920s. You can have any date that you like as long as it's December 3rd. So December 3rd is really the first reporting date of most of the things that we have to have either completion or the first round of reporting completed on. Now, 12/3 actually really reflects the date of any kind of training that we would do with staff and any correction to any of the problems that were found during the reporting. March 4th is actually given to us as a date to really kind of look long-term. Is what we did actually sticking, and can we actually prove it through reviews of records and submitting evidence to DESE relevant to specific items or specific data collection for each one of these points. Special ed, most of the problems that we found there, again, partially implemented items. Some of our forms called ed assessments, they're actually completed during certain types of IEP meetings where we give a form to either sometimes guidance staff, sometimes general ed staff. And it was noted that some of the general ed staff had not returned the forms for the actual IEP meetings. So part of the correction with that is to reconvene those meetings where the records were reviewed and we were out of compliance. We were talking about 2 students at this point. And then to actually develop a tracking log to make sure that during every IEP meeting that this type of document is used in, that we actually collect data to make sure that those documents have been done and they're physically in existence during that meeting. And if they're not, then that March 4th date, if I identified that we were out of compliance again with a certain case, what would be the root cause, why didn't it get done, and then what did we do to correct it, which would probably mean reconvening the team meeting again to review those documents. And that's really what happened with the ones that we had to review when we got back together after the reviews were done. Some of the items also included reviews of our reports, how we actually do report writing. There was a recommendation that the related service providers and specialists, they need to provide more of a summary and diagnostic impressions in their reports and to use common language that parents can understand. So that is more of a long-term goal. We'll be looking at reviewing some of the reports, which have already started to come into me, and reviewing what their content looks like relevant to their summaries. One of the bigger things that came up was that some folks would say determinations from this report will be used to determine eligibility in the IEP team. Instead of saying, we saw a weakness in this area, this would be a strategy that might be helpful. So for some of the things, as soon as we went through our exit review, way back the end of last year in April, we started to address the things just from that interview before the auditor even left the district. So some of these things I'm very glad to say that we're knee-deep in. And fortunately, a couple of them were things that we had started even before DESE walked through the door because we recognized that they were weaker areas for us. 45-day timelines for special ed is another area that we need to focus on a bit. We've already been training with special ed staff and general ed staff on this. It essentially means that during an initial evaluation, we have to have testing done in a timeline and also meetings done within that 45-day timeline. There's a misunderstanding with some of our staff thinking that the 45 days meant that we had to have the meeting and not the IEP in the parents' hands. So somebody might actually schedule a meeting for day 44 and thinking that they have another 10 days after the meeting to actually get the IEP to the parent. And that's not the case with reevaluations and initials. They have to have the documents in the parent's hands by that day 45. So that alone covers a couple of different things that we got cited on. IEP development and content, there were a couple files where we had some things that were outdated. People had not eliminated services in some of the PLEPs. The PLEPs, there's 2 pages in the IEP called PLEPs. They're really current levels of educational performance in the general ed setting. So there are accommodations that students need to actually access the curriculum. They're not necessarily IEP services, they're not instructional components that we would supply for our department. They're really supports for more or less accommodations and not modifications. So if a accommodation was actually removed, it wasn't removed all the time throughout the entire document. It might show up on the flap. There was some language in one of the documents that suggested that people were just kind of like building on previous language. So it might have said, now Johnny is doing this. Well, now might have meant last year, not this year with the new proposed document. So there are a couple things there that we had to clean up with language. Also, one of the other things is when an IEP meeting ends, we send out a form, basically a document called the N1. It's a recap of everything that occurred in the team meeting. And some of the feedback that we got from the SC with that was that it did not tell a narrative, or really a descriptive story of everything that had been discussed. And there are 6 particular points of that narrative that have to be approached in that document. Our N1s didn't always reflect that we had covered all those 6 places. And the last one actually has to deal with private schools. It's kind of one of those arguments you could make as to whether we're actually doing it according to Hoyle or something similar that actually made as much sense to us and met kind of like all the criteria. If we have a private school student that's actually referred for an initial evaluation, we find that student eligible. Our past practice has been to put that student on an IEP. They would receive progress reports, consultation through the related service providers if it was homeschooled or a private school student. And really the state said, well, you probably shouldn't be doing it that way. And so they suggested that we use this document called the service plan, which we have. The service plans are literally a 2-page document. They're not as extensive as an IEP. They're a lot easier for us to fill out. We did modify it because they wanted to make sure that we had consultation built in for parents and private school staff in the document. So we ended up altering the service plan. We've gone through training with some of our related service providers and specialists to make sure that when they actually use that form, they're using it instead of the IEP or 504 plan. That really covers all of the special ed components. For English language learners, there were 3 different areas that we need to address. Again, right now we're talking about for one student. We have to develop an ESL curriculum. Now that really means more than just purchasing materials. We have to set up a schedule where our ELL teacher can coordinate and collaborate with general ed teachers to make sure that the content standards in the classroom are also in alignment with an English language curriculum and standard as well. So there are some guidelines through WIDA for that, and right now we're trying to develop that plan of how it's going to roll out, what it would look like for each grade level, and how we would incorporate those standards through WIDA into the general ed classroom. One of the other points that we had to touch upon was teacher licensure. This is something we've been trying to address because our ELL teacher is not right now certified as an ELL teacher. She has actually applied for certification. We're trying to help her actually find a supervised experience so that while she's working, she needs basically 150 hours of supervision over that so that she can get a certification. That's actually part of the corrective action plan for this. And we've been working on this for about a year. We've also posted the position to see if there was any kind of external input from folks that might be interested in working as an ELL teacher. We've received no applicants at this point. That also too will be part of the corrective action. And we'll submit that as evidence as part of our corrective action plan for that item. And then we also need to do a program evaluation. Again, talking about for one student, but we're looking at what ways can we essentially self-assess and look for ways that we can improve our ELL programs. We've actually, over the last couple of years, our staff, especially the two folks that are really monitoring and doing the assessments for WIDA, or basically ELL, are going out to conferences on a yearly basis to make sure that their skills are up to date. We've kind of changed and gone along with the changes of the state to make sure that we're going from paper to computer-based tests. And now we've added quite a bit of curriculum materials, and again, making things more alignment just because of the CPR review. So the program evaluation will probably reflect some of that, but it is a step that we have to do as part of the curriculum. The last group of items would be the civil rights. And in civil rights, again, we're finding a lot of partially implemented items here. Most of the things are due by December 3rd, just like with the other two sections. And it covers a bunch of different things, including policies, procedures. Some things are building specific. The first one actually has to deal with hiring practices relevant to students who do either school to work types of things. Essentially, there is a huge focus, and this will be a trend that you probably hear from me with a lot of these. The trend is that we need to address anti-discrimination in a lot of the different things we do. So I'm going to group really a small bunch of these into one category that has to do with anti-discrimination. We do bias reviews of our literature. So if a teacher actually has To Kill a Mockingbird, they'll talk about some of the language that's used in the book and talk about prejudice and bias in the class as a lesson. That's going to be part of our corrective action. We need to have really all of our staff look through the materials that they use in the classroom, whether it's books, whether it's visuals on the wall, whether it's pamphlets that are used in a guidance counseling session, games that are used to stress social interactions, and to see if there's any kind of anti-discrimination or bias presented in the materials. And if there are, how do we actually balance that exchange? Well, To Kill a Mockingbird, again, we're talking about a period piece, but in some of the pamphlets and materials that we might actually use as support materials, we need to address if there is bias that's actually presented in some of those pieces of literature. Just before we submitted our evidence back in May of 2017, some of the counseling staff did a bias review, and they found that some of the visuals used in some of the pamphlets about bullying suggested one race bullying over another one. We might have a discussion about that, but without the discussion, it really has no context. So some of the evidence for us will be really documentation that bias reviews are being done in the classes and also in our offices with our specialists. And that if we are coming across this, how are we actually addressing it with the students, whether it's individually or small groups or in the classroom setting. It also has a reflection on anti-hazing, and specifically, in this case, it was for the middle school. The anti-hazing procedure, we needed to beef up the anti-discrimination lines in it or text to make sure that it included things like gender identity, things along that line that get added to and addressed, and that we can document that students are receiving information on anti-hazing, anti-discrimination procedures or policies in the district, and that those are consistent with kids that participate in sports events. So a couple of different things there, also with our high school employment practices. So those employers that are actually in agreement to take students on site, they will receive, again, an anti-discrimination statement, and they're going to be asked to basically review and sign it, and will contain all those anti-discrimination statements that are included in that. One of the items that we did get resolved on because of the website that I mentioned earlier was actually relevant to the identification of the Title IX and 504 officers. So the state was fine with that. So no December 3rd reporting on that. That one is actually off of our list. Student discipline, bullying prevention. Some of those things actually came up with relevant to how they're actually presented in the handbook and what our policies actually look like for some of these things. Policies and sometimes procedures for some of these. In the student handbook, they were looking for how are you identifying that a 504 student is actually being disciplined? What's the procedures for that? What's the procedures for emergency removals? What are the procedures for a superintendent or a principal hearing? And for students with disabilities that are actually on IEPs, how do they actually get addressed? Because there are some safeguards for students with disabilities whether they're on a 504 or on an IEP. If a student is on an IEP, or even if they're in the pipeline for being evaluated, not that we've actually met on the student yet to talk about eligibility, but just that we've identified that they're going to be reviewed or evaluated, that student has to be treated as if they are on an IEP. So a student that is possibly referred to us for a reading disability and comes across a discipline issue at school, we have to treat them as if they are on an IEP. And so that would mean that we have to go through the whole manifestation determination process if they were actually suspended for up to 10 days, in one given shot, or during that time that they're actually being evaluated. So those types of things, those safeguards, those procedural safeguards for parents or students to be aware of, all those things have to actually be in the handbook. For students, and this is more of a high school issue, students that have dropped out or are looking at dropping out, there is kind of a process here relevant to notifying the student and the parents within 10 days. If they have 10 absences, we notify them 5 days later that they're at risk of dropping out, asking them if that's their intent, and also indicating to them that they have a time to engage in an exit interview. And during that process, we're supposed to do things like present 2 dates and times that they could possibly meet, and that some of the things that would be covered would include some of their options, versus dropping out. Also, we have to go back a year, and we have to do this every year. So we didn't have good evidence to support that we were doing this on a regular basis. But for students that dropped out last year, we're supposed to get in touch with them somehow this year and find out if they're employed, if they did seek something else after they left us, and what some of those options might be, publicly funded options, that they could still avail themselves to if they haven't somehow gotten a high set or gotten into college or some sort of other trade or employment. Beyond that, physical restraint policy, actually it's something that we're looking to update and review. I know folks here have been working on that. There was a section called Responsibilities of the School Principal, and this is actually one of the things that I'm quite pleased about that we were able to identify ahead of time. We kind of identified that the student find or study process was a bit fragmented or inconsistent between buildings and the district. So more than a year ago, we developed a work team to actually look at how we would develop a new system of identifying students that might be at risk, linking that to basically a building-based, but also a district-wide format that would be used across the district. And we actually introduced over the summer what we are referring to as the TAP process. It really stands for Teacher Assistance Teams. It's not a random title that we picked. It's actually supported in some of the literature. So we have a good research-based point to go back to. And essentially what it does is hold teams together to say, if a student is struggling and we haven't collected any data on strategies that might actually help that student out, we're going to go through at least a 6-week process of introducing strategies, collecting data on that, and determining if those strategies were effective or not, and then revisiting what we've been doing, if it was effective or not. And if the student then needs a referral to special ed or 4504 plan, then we go to the initial evaluation process through the special ed department. That is also being included in part of our corrective action plan through a district curriculum accommodation plan. So that TAP process will be listed in the DCAP. The DCAP is one of the things that we were cited on. We have one. It wasn't widely distributed throughout the district. It will become a document that's available on the website. We'll actually share it with staff. The DCAP itself basically talks about all those services included in general ed and outside of general ed that are available to staff, parents, students that can actually, they can avail themselves of or explore to see if it's the right service or fit for them. And the final thing on the civil rights review is actually institutional self-assessment. During part of the review process, the DESE did come out and they spent a little bit of time with us one morning doing a review of civil rights numbers 24 and 25. And there's kind of a link to these, and it gets back to that whole bias review. But one of the the corrective action for our self-assessment is that we've taken some of that information that was shared with us by DESI, created a survey that we'll be using to distribute to parents, also to staff, and some students depending on what age level they're at, and then taking the results of that survey, kind of breaking down the data and see if there's any areas that we need to address, and then develop plans for resolving any of those areas that we found. So overall, that is a nutshell.
That's quite a nutshell.
That's my version of a nutshell these days. Of the corrective action process. So essentially, reporting for December 3rd is our next round. A lot of this, like I said, we're already deeply engaged in, and hopefully to have everything finished by March 4th. Any questions at all? Anybody like to take a nap before?
Questions? I think my only question would be, are you comfortable with that March 4th date? With getting all of this, or being a, and I guess let me ask the question this way, if we don't meet the March 4th date, if we're in progress, what does that look like?
They'll want to see everything completed before August 19th, which would have been the day before we received our final report. I'm pretty comfortable with the March 4th date because most of the stuff I wanted to get off of our plates before probably the end of January. There's only one, the private school piece. Right now we supply like walk-in services for private school students. It's maybe 7 or 8 kids at the most. So collecting data on that, I was projecting that maybe out to May, because we could be in a year where we see maybe no one from a private school or very few kids at all. So the data collection for that could be very, very minimal.
Anything else? Well, thank you. I mean, there's a lot of work that's been done. I'm encouraged because I know we've spoken, I believe, last year with a lot of these initiatives that you had already undertaken with the district to put us in a position to be in progress with most of these. So thank you for the hard work, and we'll have you back for an update probably after whichever date, maybe the March date. We'll give you a few more months. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up, our business manager report. Mrs. Geister.
There's not a lot that's changed in the last couple weeks since our last meeting. The treasurer and I are actually beginning to close the books now and start the E&D calculations to be submitted. The end of the year report went in last month, no problem, on time. Haven't heard from them, so that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Anyone have any questions? The numbers are here for us to review. Anyone have any questions on any of the data? No, it is early. I'll just ask the Ms. Tripolo's absence about grants. Are the money's coming in?
Yeah, I mean, it comes, the first payment comes automatically, and then it gets requested every month as it gets spent down.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. The superintendent contract update, just wanted to do a quick update. Mrs. Tripolo and I have met with Dr. Casavant, as we had done at the behest of the committee, I think a couple of months ago, and we're working on coming up with a contract that we'll have ready for, to bring forth, and probably in the next couple of months we'll have that all, it's a red line right now, we just got to get it finalized, and we'll bring it back to the committee for review. So that's where that is.
Yes.
Good. All right, public input. Any public input? I see none. NDEA, I know that the rep is not here this evening, so we'll skip over that. School committee comments. Any comments from the school committee?
I only have one. Just that the homecoming that we had for the kids was very nice. It was different having the carnival and the fireworks and all the shenanigans. The only comment I would like to make is that being a a parent of a football player. It was a little difficult, I guess would be the word, for the football players having the game on Saturday instead of Friday. So just, if whoever was in charge of this switch, if we could maybe keep that in mind, that the boys are used to playing on Friday and, not being up all night on Friday night and then going and play football on Saturday.
The dance was Friday night, I just want to make sure.
Correct, right. So it was just, they had to get there earlier in the day for practice, and so it was just a little difficult for them. I know the coaches weren't very happy about the switch. The boys in turn had to make sacrifices, so that was it. But all in all, I think the whole homecoming events went well.
Thank you.
I have a question for Dr. Casavant. How do we cover games or events athletically if we have 2 or 3 going on at the same time?
We juggle. Obviously, Mr. Barry is at 1 in this scenario, whatever that may be. We could very well have and have JV, let's say, football game on the lower field, a varsity field hockey on the main field, and a soccer game at Gilman and Wade. And those, some combination thereof, happen. What we try to do is, Mr. Barry will be in a bunch of different places, but we try to dispatch administratively folks out to the field. It doesn't work as well as we'd like it to, because we may have a 504 meeting after school, or we may have some type of obligation. I like to go to the game, so they'll anoint me the administrator in charge, which they don't like to do, but they sometimes have to in a pinch. But we try to put administrators at every game. It's a bit cumbersome, right? And so it's hard at times. It truly is. Administratively, that has to go through the building principals. If something needs to happen, then the information flows up, and then it has to flow down. So, we're working on systems. I think that it's difficult at times, although the rainouts, by the way, just cause complete havoc.
Do you know how other schools around us?
Not really. Certainly we've talked. We've talked athletics, but I think different models are used. I think, quite frankly, and I don't know.
Are you going to look into that?
Well, apparently I am.
I think you will.
I'm putting that on my to-do list.
And to add to your concerns, I think with all of the new policies with no smoking, no vaping, especially the vaping, because we still,
who's in charge?
people, when things happen, if there is no one to contact, I think it's really important we have a presence. So yes, I think that would be nice to maybe find out if there's a better way.
And to the point about our homecoming extravaganza, I think that certainly I had heard some grumblings that the football players, they threw them off their game. I will say, as one person put, that doesn't necessarily mean that on that Saturday that it would be a football game. It could very well be a field hockey game. It could very well be a soccer game, name a sport. I can just keep going. That the highlighted sport doesn't necessarily have to be a football game, and that was a point well taken. Quite frankly, from my end, because I think we assume lots of times that when we talk homecoming, we talk football. But that's not necessarily the case. If you are an athlete plays another sport, it's their homecoming as well. And so we've had some great feedback for the event. We certainly also had some other feedback that we're gonna look into, but I know that the community really enjoyed it, and we're gonna see what we can tweak otherwise. But thank you. I got that on my list.
Any other comments from the school committee? Okay. All right, surplus items. We have a list of surplus books from see. Outdated curriculum, resources, and supplies. Everyone has the memo in front of them from various schools. Actually, we have a pommel vaulting horse at Phillipston. Plus other various copies of things that I would entertain a motion to approve this surplus list.
So moved.
I had a first and a second. Any discussions, other than maybe how do we get on the list to get that vaulting horse? Because it would probably make a good clothes stand at home.
Vault, pommel vaulting is it's a lost art. And so,
And it's vintage
are-
1970,
yeah,
by the
and-
way, if
and
there's
so
anyone looking for a vintage
as
pommel.
a former.
I can
pommel
remember
vaulter,
jumping over that horse, so there you go.
Well, I think we'll watch you do it.
No, I was never very good, never very good. Always got sick to my stomach.
I'll look into what the regulations are around that.
Any actual real discussion? And seeing done, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed and abstained? Unanimous. Thank you. Okay. The Mass Association of School Committees resolutions for consideration at the 2018 annual meeting. Once again, I'd like to thank this committee for voting me as the delegate. It is tongue-in-cheek sarcasm for anyone who may not have picked up on that. There are 9 resolutions this year. I would like to just address the committee with what they're about, get any feedback. They're fairly straightforward this year. Last year there was a couple of interesting ones. The first one is rejecting the arming of educators. So what the Mass Association of School Committees do is they will put lobbying efforts forth for these resolutions at the legislative front. So they'll send their people in to lobby with the legislators on these items as bills are presented. And what they ask the delegates to do, which is one representative from each of their, basically every school district that belongs to MASC, which is just not everyone, is we get to vote on these resolutions to decide if we want them to support that. And so again, the first one is rejecting the arming of educators. Basically, that MASC rejects the notion of providing firearms to any educators, and the rationale is the safest environment would be to provide additional mental health resources and violence prevention programs in public schools. The second resolution has to do with small and rural districts. MASC calls for the creation of a working group to advise the legislature on the best public policy solutions to support small and rural school districts. And there's a whole bunch of things that they want this working group to look at. Chapter 70 funding is the big one, obviously, to try and look at the financials of these small and rural districts. And we would want to support that. Resolution 3 is elimination of the Federal Department of Education. So right now there's some talk about merging departments together. So the merger of 2 government agencies could diminish the work of the current education and labor departments. And MASC works with the federal delegation to reject any notion of combining these 2 departments together. The fourth is regional school transportation, which we have a high interest in. So this all has to go around lack of bidders. So the resolution would be to promote greater competition for bus service contracts. The legislature should eliminate Mass General Law 71, Section 7C, and authorize a deeper analysis of the lack of bidders on school transportation contracts. So this one's been in the news and quite prominent. Resolution 5 is reporting and accountability standards. MASC works with the legislature and Board of Elementary and Secondary Education to ensure all students or persons in schools that receive public funds under the authority of the Mass Department of Ed or a local public school district are held to the same standards and requirements in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So that would be public funds going to any sort of, maybe a charter school or anyone who receives any public funds would be held to the same accountable standards. Resolution 6, reproductive health education. MASC would support evidence-based reproductive health curricula. Further, we call upon the U.S. Department of Ed and executive branch to stop their support of abstinence-only education, because that's the only education that they are supporting currently. Resolution 7 has to do with gender identity inclusive athletic participation policy, and this was actually submitted by Framingham School Committee. They're very active on this group. And MASC would help to file legislation which would have the effect of protecting LGBTQ students from discrimination, harassment, bullying. By the schools should treat students based on the gender identity, protecting privacy, etc. And there's rationale for the at-risk students. So this one here, with guidance from legislature, will have better protections and have reduced adverse behaviors. Resolution 8 is sports wagering. This one here, they want to implement sports wagering in the state, and they would like to, the general court should enact legislation to legalize wagering on sporting events and commit a portion of the revenues generated from sports wagering to public education. The big difference between this one, if you remember the millionaire's tax from last year, which was to lobby to get some of those monies dedicated to public education, it failed in the Supreme Court because the way the law is written, that income tax has to go to the general fund. Since this would be a new law, they would encourage the writing of the law to say that part of the monies would be able to go to public education, and that would allow that to happen. So that's what this one is. And last but not least, access to information for parents and students who are clients of special education. MASC urges the legislation to amend state law to require that parents and students be provided with a copy via email or mail of all the assessments that are performed for students in the family's preferred language at least 5 days prior to any meeting at which parents and students will review a proposed IEP. So those are the 9. There's also an amendment to the MASC bylaws that has to do with the annual meeting date. They're just changing some of that so it can happen earlier. So those are the 9 resolutions. I don't know if anyone has any comments or questions. I don't see us voting against supporting any of these unless anyone has any concerns they want to raise. Okay, with that being said, I will serve the committee well in my delegate role.
Thank you.
As always.
All right. Next up, change in school committee reorg meeting date, which is presently May 8th, 2019. And this is as a result in the change of the town election dates. So we normally meet the Wednesday after town election, which was the first Monday in May, and we reorganize because we have new members. And now that the elections are until the 3rd Monday, we wouldn't be able to reorganize until that happens. We had 2 meetings on the books for May. We had May 8th and May 22nd. So the proposal would be to eliminate the May 8th meeting, which was strictly reorganizational, and do all of those things at the Wednesday, May 22nd meeting. The only thing that we'll have to think about is where normally we have the May 8th meeting in Phillipston, and I think that was driven because of the Phillipston town meeting. And should we have it here? I don't know if there's, we do 2 meetings in Phillipston, and I think it was just a convenience thing to have it in Phillipston. So
Yeah, because we do August and January.
yes, so.
Yeah, that makes sense, I think, because they'll need the gym, obviously, correct?
Well, because they'll still have the town meeting, I think will still be that first Wednesday.
Right.
It'll happen
Right.
before,
Oh,
so.
that's right, yeah.
So, does anyone have any objections to combining the 2 meetings to the 22nd? And we'll have it here in the Kiva?
Sounds good.
Okay, so we shall make that date and update our schedule to cancel the May 8th meeting and combine those reorg activities on May 22nd. Okay. Superintendent report. I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Casavant for a few items, unless we take a break.
So really, the enrollment and school choice update really are one. We're in October, so we did our enrollment report as of the 16th, yesterday. We're still at 1,431 students. We have 250 school choice students currently, which is 17% of our overall district student population. And we've been pretty steady over the last, in terms of school months, last school months. So in terms of our enrollment, in terms of school choice, we're right where we were last time. I'm not making any recommendations to open up school choice at this point because we're still full, as we were last month. But we're stable, and that's always good. Any questions?
We submitted our October 1 numbers?
Yes, we did, and they're gone, so that's also a big sigh of relief for us as well. The Betty Allen Temple Trust update. So the last time I spoke, we were in discussion with the lawyer who is in charge of disseminating, the monies through the scholarship. I did have a phone call today with Miracle Connell, who's representing us, Tracy, and there seems to be when I say an issue, we're not getting a lot of information back. So what the idea was that the request is that what was bequeathed for the scholarships that we could start the foundation. There's been very little movement on the other side of that. So we're doing some checking into that. The foundation board has been set. We had our first meeting. We talked about what kind of the direction we want to go in. But in terms of the scholarship will happen. It's just where will the money reside? And that's what we're trying to work out currently. So, in terms of an update, there really isn't anything different than what I reported. We're still looking into the foundation piece. We're still looking into. Okay, so if the money stays with, in California, so to speak, how do we know that money is going to, come over a period of time, and we'd like some assurances, that kind of thing. So we're still working on it. It's been a long haul. So, but again, I'm hopeful to have some type of clarity before December, but we'll see.
Anything else that you'd like to report?
No, well, let's see. We've, the opening for everyone, I talked about the smooth opening for us. Honestly, in central office, it's busy in October for a lot of reasons, most of it reporting, and we seem to be, and we're doing well. We've had quite a changeover in administration in September, and we're starting to just settle in, and so that's been excellent, because the administrative team now is complete, and so the work that we need to do, we'll talk about MCAS here in a few minutes, et cetera. All the hands that we need in order to do that are available. They're here. They're acclimated, and so we can move on. We've quite a bit of work, as you know, and as I outlined, with what I'll call the reconfiguration, is once Templeton Center, we're well past, I wonder if it's going to be built. We have a tentative schedule already, student schedule for Templeton Center at this point. We're looking at the budgeting piece, as we talked about at the joint meetings. We're looking at what it does to the middle school and creating that schedule, because of course it'll be less the 5th grade. So we're moving along quickly with that, and we'll have most of that done by December, January, in terms of schedules, et cetera, for next year, because we need to understand what that's going to look like in terms of budgeting. Other than that, it's been, pretty quiet.
Okay.
Yep.
MCAS results. We have Ms. Calise with us today to tell us everything there is to know about our MCAS results.
It's simple.
Good luck.
So I wanted to talk about a couple of things. One is the change in the accountability system for how the state is designating schools and districts, which is different this year than it has been in the past. Then talk a little bit about our results, and then end with some actions that we're taking as a result of those. So you hopefully have a sheet that looks like this in your packet. I'm going to start just by saying that the state has somewhat shifted their philosophy in the accountability system. In the past, districts were rated and schools were rated levels 1 to 5. You know that we were rated level 3, and the district was rated the level of its lowest performing school. That's not the case anymore. That's not how they're doing it moving forward. And it's a shift in philosophy, because under the old system, the state rated schools and districts and provided assistance to the lowest performing districts. Under the new system, the philosophy is that all schools have some underperforming population, and rather than focus on kind of comparing us to each other, we're looking at our own results and comparing ourselves to what we can achieve. So we're looking at all of our students, and then we're also looking at our underperforming students. Whether you're, no matter what kind of district, where you are in the state, everyone has a population to pay attention to. So they think of this as raising the floor, right, across the state. So there are new accountability indicators. And this chart shows you, at the top it says schools without required assistance or intervention, and then schools requiring assistance or intervention. So those first 3 boxes from the left are 85% of the state, and there's schools of recognition, and then in between those 2 dark bars, you can see schools meeting targets or partially meeting targets. And all 3 of those would be schools without required assistance or intervention. All of our schools and our district are classified as schools without requiring assistance or intervention. You'll notice, though, that it says partially meeting targets has percentages from 0 to 74, and meeting targets are 75 to 100. So that's quite a range, 0 to 74. This year, the categories in between those 2 dark bars are meeting and partially meeting, but next year and moving forward from that, it'll be meeting, partially meeting, and not meeting. Okay, so this was the first year of this new system, and so everyone is more or less in partially meeting or meeting, unless you're a school of distinction or recognition. The lowest performing of those schools that are partially meeting can be designated to the right as needing focused or targeted support or broad comprehensive support. Okay, so that's how they're classifying us now, and we're in the schools without requiring assistance or intervention. They do this with 2 components. The new accountability system has a normative component and a criterion referenced component. You'll see that this chart talks about criterion referenced target percentage, right? The normative component is a little bit of a holdover from the old system where schools are ranked. The criterion reference component, from which all of that data comes, takes the schools and looks at achievement, growth, high school completion, ELL, and some additional indicators. We don't have any scores in English language learners because we don't have a high enough population in that. So our schools are classified using achievement, growth, and additional indicators. The high school also has the high school completion category. So there's 3 or 4 categories that our schools are graded on, and schools fall into one of 3 buckets, but we only really have 2 in Narragansett. You're either a high school or a non-high school. That's it. So all of our other schools are non-high schools, and then we have the high school. As you know, the high school still is administering a legacy MCAS, which is the older MCAS. That'll change in this spring, 2019. They'll be administering MCAS 2.0 along with all of the high schools in the state, and that will be a big shift for them. So you you might have a sheet with some notes on it. So all of our schools, including the district, are categorized in this group of not requiring assistance or intervention. The normative component, which is that kind of ranking component, gives schools a percentile of 1 to 99, and it compares schools administering similar assessments in those two buckets, non-high school and high school. So you can see there I listed what those percentiles are for our schools, and Phillipston is too small, the cohort is too small to be rated. The criterion referenced, which really gives us a lot more information, talks about our progress towards meeting targets. And the good news in this section is that you can see that Baldwinville had the highest of all the schools as far as their percentage towards their criterion reference score. So that's really a nice turnaround. They had good results in their achievement as well as in their growth. Teachers in the elementaries should be really proud of that work. The high school is doing fine as well, and then we have some work to do at the middle school. They assign points for each of those targets. So the assessment area is 67 for non-high schools, is 67.5% of the score. It's weighted heavily on assessments. That includes math, ELA, and science and CAS. The student growth is 22.5%, and then 10% is absenteeism. That's for our non-high schools. And you get points, and it lists, at the bottom of the sheet, if they give us a target, and if we declined from 2017 to 2018, we get 0 points. If we had no change from 2017 to 2018, we got 1 point. If we improved, but we didn't meet the target, you get 2 points. If you met the target, you get 3 points. If you exceed the target, you get 4. So we had some categories where we had some small declines that resulted in a 0 for those schools. And again, the assessment category is 67.5%. It's a little different. It's 40-something at the high school because they have additional indicators. They also have advanced coursework completion, high school graduation rate, extended graduation rate, and some other things that factor in at the high school. So the bottom line is we're rated on 2 components, the normative component and the criterion referenced. On the criterion reference, we had some mixed results, and regardless, we still have fallen into the schools without required assistance or intervention. But we want to pay attention to it because next year, when they break that into 3 categories, and it's meeting targets, partially meeting targets, and not meeting targets, we want to make sure we're not in that not meeting target category. Questions about that? It's kind of a big picture. What we've done, yes.
Just trying to
I know it's a
follow
lot to
along.
absorb.
So if I'm
I had a
looking at this,
6-hour webinar. I condensed it to about 4 minutes.
so if I'm looking at this right, the Baldwinville Elementary School is pretty close to meeting targets. If they went up to the 75, they'd be in that next category of meeting targets, is that right?
Yeah.
So then the middle school,
Mm.
okay, all right, I just want to make sure I'm looking at this the right way and following it.
Correct, which is a
Got
little
it.
bit of a surprise.
Okay, thank you.
So what we did, I took the data from the State Department of Ed, and they provide a lot of data, not necessarily in the most useful form for teachers, so I downloaded a lot of the data into spreadsheets for teachers, and I have met with, or will have met with, every grade level or content area from K to 12. I have a few meetings left, but I've done most of them at this point. And so each team that I met with, I gave them, so if it was, for example, a 6th grade team, I gave them results of the 5th grade MCAS because that's their current students. So it's a list of all the students and how they answered each question. And on each question, it has the standard. So it has all of their students, all of the students from the previous grade, because those are the students in front of them right now. And I've told them with those results, they really need to look at where are the skill deficits? How do I need to differentiate for these students that are in front of me? and what decisions can I make instructionally to support some gaps that they might have, right? And then I gave them their current grade, which is the kids that they taught last year that have now moved on. And those results they should look at with a curricular lens. Those results show that they placed the proper emphasis on topics. Are there things that students didn't do well on that is a surprise to them? Are there things students didn't do well on that they may need to adjust their curriculum or adjust the timing of it? So they're looking at those with two lenses. So I gave them an overview of the results for their school, as well as that detailed information for their grade levels. Friday, we're going to follow up with professional development and for middle and high, and they're going to take those sheets and to come up with some action steps by content area. So they're going to sit together as math or science and so forth, look at the results and see what action steps they can take to make improvements. So I think we have a good plan in place. We did notice, looking at the results, that some of the longer, I'm going to call it essays on the English test, as well as the open response questions on mathematics, were questions that we sometimes underperformed on, and they're questions that form a large percentage of the test. So in math, you have 4, in the upper grades, middle school, you have 4 open response questions that are more than 30% of the score of the test. You have 3 long essays in English that are more than 40% of the score of the test. So you might have 40 questions. They all vary. Each test is 40, 24, it varies. But only 3 of them count for a significant portion of the test. So how are we preparing our students to answer those questions? And we have a plan in place because we knew that this was work that we had to continue, but these results confirm that this is the right direction. We're going to have a consultant come in for 3 of our half days and do work on writing across the curriculum with secondary teachers. So all middle and high school teachers will have that 3 days of professional development. So math teachers will look at how are students writing math, and science teachers how are they doing science and so forth. And I think that will tackle some of this. So we have some good plans in place to make improvements for our students. Finally, I did want to mention that we had an opportunity to send a couple people to a literacy leadership summit. They originally invited me to go. It's a leadership summit in Nashville, and it's all expenses paid. And I asked if I could defer it and send 2 other administrators. I said, first, can I send 2 people instead of 1? Can I send other administrators instead of me? And they eventually agreed. So Shantae and Courtney will be going to that summit in Nashville on literacy leadership, which will again support our work.
Great.
Questions or comments?
Is this, am I not seeing a comparison
It
to
was
other
a-
school districts? Is that,
So-
like, to the state, in the past, the impasse was,
So there's a lot of data that can be presented, right? When you look at these percentiles, for example, if you look at Waltonville with 69% of and partial meeting, right? That's comprised of the things that I said, right? So it's comprised of the achievement, the growth, and so forth. So if you look at achievement in one of the areas, for example, say you took math achievement, and we get that they give us points, 0 to 4, right? And that's how they come up with this percentile. They take our score in 2017 and our score in 2018. They look back in history. They make a target for us, right? And they say, as it says, 0 points if you decline, 1 point no change, 2 points if you improve, 3 points if you meet target, 4 points if you exceed target. The reason I'm mentioning this is because it makes it difficult to compare yourself to other districts.
not apples to
Which
apples.
is the shift in philosophy, right? It's a shift away from really making those comparisons to how are we doing against our own performance in the past. Because other districts might, on the surface, seem like they have higher percentiles, but they might have had lower targets. So unless you look at all of that detail, it's hard to draw any conclusions. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So if our target is 500, but a neighboring district's target is 400, and they got 401, and we got 499, we didn't meet target. They exceeded target. They got 4 points, and we got 2 or 1,
I get it.
right?
Wow, what a change.
Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
You
And
compare
which
against
is-
yourself.
Right.
Pardon me?
You compare against
You're
yourself, which
comparing
makes
against
sense.
yourself, which makes sense, and that's what we want our kids to do, right? We want our teachers to be teaching to the standard, and we want students to be compared against the standard, not compared against how I'm doing next to you and how somebody else is doing.
Right.
So it does make sense. Now, they're hedging their bets because they're also giving us the normative component where they're ranking us, right? But if we pay attention to those criterion reference scores, you know, we looked at our attendance, chronic absenteeism is 10% of our score. Well, if you had 5%, I'm making this up, right? If you had 5% chronic absenteeism and now you have 6, that's going in the wrong direction, you get 0 points. But somebody else might have had 12% and they got 11, they're going in the right direction, right? So regardless, we're looking at that, and actually, Mr. Trevisano is working with me, compiling all our codes and talking to the state about what do they, you know, what goes into how they receive that information and kind of cleaning that up and maybe making that a little more streamlined. And in addition to that, paying attention to what can we do to improve absenteeism, and you know, there are programs out there, and there's outreach to parents and so forth. So we're looking at the different aspects of it so we can improve against ourselves.
Wow.
That's how it should be. You know, it's hard because we do compare ourselves locally and vice versa, but the fact is that they've assigned us, Narragansett, of course at all the different levels in schools, but they've assigned our target. And so that's all that really matters. And so that's you know, it's a great way to frame that.
Yeah, what's interesting is if you actually go out to DESI's website and really drill down on the results and this matrix with this points assigning, you'll see some of it we missed target by just nothing.
7/10 of a
Which
point.
meant we got 0 points. So it's, you know, it's directional, and I think what I took away from the discussion that we had at our academic administrative meeting last month when we kind of delved into these results that were hot off the press, and this discussion tonight is in the past we've been focused so much on what are the results, and we're focusing more on what are the actions we're doing because of the results. I think that tells the story of where we're going with this, so I'm very encouraged to hear that, you know, you've been able to take that data and really look at where we need to focus, and giving the teachers the tools to be able to look at their practice and what we can do for each of the students. So I think that's wonderful.
And the teachers have been very, very receptive, so that's really good.
Any other comments or questions?
I think we're looking pretty good. I do. I mean,
It's a
we're
little
going in the
more.
right direction. But look at Baldwinville, that's fabulous.
That's a great celebration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. So, subcommittee and committee reports. Academic and administrative, again, we've been focusing mostly on MCAS results and some of the other curriculum items. One of the interesting things we talked about in academic and administrative is we had discussed AP exams. And that is actually one of the indicators that the state is using as part of the accountability. And it's not how many classes are taken, it's number of students enrolled. So that's going to be an interesting one to see how that plays out, because that in itself, like chronic absenteeism, if we have a shift in population and our enrollment declines, how do they bake that into the number? We might not have enough students to take the classes, never mind meet a target goal. So it'll be interesting to see that. Finance. We had a multi-board meeting on Monday with the Town of Templeton Board of Selectmen. The Town of Templeton Advisory Board was represented, the Town of Phillipston Board of Selectmen, and the Town of Phillipston FinCom to kind of kick off budget discussions for FY20. So we've opened up the discussions. What I did want to ask the group, and specifically Dr. Cassavant and Ms. Geister, is we had initially set a meeting of October 29th at 5 o'clock to kind of kick off our board meeting for finance. Are you far enough in the process that that meeting would be beneficial, or should we wait till the 14th?
Well, I think the question goes back to what would you like to see? You know, there's certainly information that we can present or can be presented. It depends on what, quite frankly. You know, really, I don't mean to answer a question with a question, but if, you know, if it was the spread, you know, the infamous, you know, complete spreadsheets, and no. But if there was some, you know, if it was a workup to that, I mean,
So I'm kind of thinking that we probably should meet, maybe to have that discussion of what are the expectations for the group, you know, going forward.
Sure.
So it sounds like we should meet on October 29th at, I think, 5 PM is what we had initially agreed upon. And that would be, I guess, our kickoff as our first committee of the whole meeting for finance. And then after that, remember, we're going to meet 5 o'clock at each school committee meeting, at the 5 o'clock hour beforehand to review budget. And if we need to have additional meetings specifically for finance, we'll schedule them as need be. So October 29th, 5 PM.
Will they be here, those 5 o'clock meetings? You're going to have them?
You know, it's a good question. On school committee nights, it makes it difficult to travel from central office here. So if you are comfortable with having them here, you know, with having everything we need to be able to have the discussions, then we could have them in the Kiva. I think on the 29th, we probably could meet at the central office rather than setting up this room for a meeting. So is the Kiva okay for? Okay.
Sure.
But the 29th is at central office?
Central office, yeah. Okay. Facilities. Do we have any updates on facilities? Haven't met yet?
No.
Okay. All right, policy, we have some first reading of policies.
We do. As usual. We'll never not have things, I'm sure. Okay, Section E, support services. EBC is a proposed update for the emergency plans, and we're changing language as recommended by MASC and update to review the cycle of the emergency plans. EF is proposed for deletion. It's a food service policy, and it can be deleted if we vote in EFT, which is a meal charge policy, which will be implemented. EFC, proposed update, free and reduced price of food services. Updated language is recommended by MASC, serves as district policy pertaining to eligibility for free milk, free meals, and reduced price meals. EFD, proposed new meal charge policy, updates policy to reflect new USDA guidelines, which require schools to develop a meal charging policy, which requires the district to provide the same meal choices to all students, but allows for restrictions on a la carte items, snacks, etc., for families who are delinquent in payment. Section J, policies, refer to the students. JFABE is a new policy. It's educational opportunities for military children. And this gives us guidelines and its wording recommended by MASC. JFABF, proposed new. This is educational opportunities for children in foster care. Again, its guidelines and the wording is recommended by MASC. Proposed update, JICE, student publications. More comprehensive policy as recommended by MASC includes school committee support and reinforces commitment to responsible journalism. Right now, we don't have a school newspaper, but if we do, this will be necessary to have. Proposed for deletion, JICI, weapons in school. This is covered in the student handbook, which is an extension of the policy, so this policy is not needed. Proposed for deletion, JICJ, use of cell phones and electronic devices in school, again, a handbook issue. JICK, student violence, harassment, intimidation, and bullying, up for deletion because it's a handbook issue. It should be in the handbook. Proposed for deletion, JJD, student activity fees. It always refers back to the handbook, and that's where the information is found. Proposed for deletion, JKD, suspension of students, procedural in nature, no corresponding policy in MASC reference guide, and it should be included in the handbook. Proposed for deletion, JKE, expulsion of students, procedural in nature, no corresponding policy in MASC reference guides, should be included in the school's handbook. Proposed for deletion, JKF, discipline of students with disabilities, procedural in nature, no corresponding policy in MASC reference guide, and it should be included in the school handbook. Proposed for deletion, JLID, student bicycle use, procedural in nature, no corresponding policy in MASC reference guide, should be included in the handbook. And last but not least, proposed for deletion, JLIE, student automobile use and parking, again, procedural. There's nothing in the MASC reference guide, and it is already covered in the school's handbook. So we have 9 up for deletion.
I just would like to add one thing. A few of these policies up for deletion, we have other policies already addressing the policy pieces of them, where these just contain some procedural information. So we're not necessarily getting rid of a policy because it is covered elsewhere. It's just this piece that should have really never been in our policy book to begin with.
So we need a motion to put these up for first reading?
So moved?
Second.
One second. All in favor? Or
Aye.
comments? I'm sorry, any comments or questions? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? And that was unanimous.
Thank you.
And as always, if anyone has any questions, comments, or concerns, you could filter the information to the policy subcommittee, which would be Mrs. Matson, Mrs. Kojal, and myself, or through Dr. Casavant, and we can review the comments prior to our second reading, or you're certainly welcome to come to the second reading and express concern at that point. Thank you. Long-term planning, Mrs. Matson, anything to report?
I have nothing.
Okay. Templeton Elementary Building Committee, Mr. Mason.
We took a tour of the building last night with Senator Goby and Rep. Whips, and everything's going along pretty cool. Again, on budget, on time. So
Nice.
It's kind of boring.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. All right. PMES Building Committee, have they had any meetings yet? Okay. So, all right. Correspondence, there is a piece of correspondence in your packages that just came in. Just for you to, it was addressed to the school committee, so passing it along for everyone to take a look at. There was really no action required. It's more informational, but it was addressed to the school committee. So when you have a chance, take a read through that. And with that, unless anyone has anything else to contribute or comment
Actually,
on.
I do have a question. When we do receive correspondence such as that, what is our action on something like that?
At this point, what I think on this particular item, read it and we can come back and discuss it at our next meeting. If there's anything, it was just a commentary on one of the policies we had put in place last year about our music and band program, and actually it was not just that program, it was all of our programs where we don't allow students from other schools to participate. So it was just questioning, saying, hey, I have a student who is going to, in this case it was Monty Tech, just wanted to say that, it's too bad that you don't have that where we could participate. Although, what could be an interesting discussion, and maybe something on Dr. Casavant's to-do list, because he is, he says it's been quiet. Could this be an opportunity to co-op with Monty Tech. I don't know what their program is, I don't know.
Yeah.
But it might be an interesting discussion to have. Do they have a marching band? I don't even know.
No, there was talk that there was something that they were organizing with Leominster. But I have no idea
Sure.
about that. But we've had conversations with districts local to us, with the band in mind. And let me say, quite frankly, that we were on board. Narragansett was really, we were trying to make some plans and just kind of fell through, on the other end. So we want the arts to live, and we are looking for ways to sustain those programs, especially. But I have added it to my to-do list, and I will report back out. How's that? All right.
You've got quite a to-do list.
Our next meeting, the October 29th finance meeting, but our regular meeting would be Wednesday, November 14th at 6 PM, right here. We will be entering into executive session to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the NDEA and UFCW. The meeting will not return into open session immediately following, and I would take a motion to do so. I have a motion,
Second.
and I have a second. Mr. Mason?
Aye.
Mrs. Mattson?
Aye.
Mr. Marks?
Aye.
Mrs. Kosel?
Aye.
Mrs. Chartier? Aye. Mrs. Robichaud? Aye. And Mrs. Hughes says aye. So we will be adjourning our public open session, and we thank everyone for attending. So I'll give the end of public